All right, Jonny, chapter 4, building your custom bridge selling framework and bridge score. This is where we get into the meat of creating your custom bridge. So in this chapter, you frame building your custom bridge as a messaging exercise, not just a process map. So talk about why is the naming and language of each step, why is that so important, particularly for adoption within a team?
Yeah, so this is key, and I think this is one of the things that it was hard to find in other sales methodologies when searching for stuff and looking through things is, well, it's a messaging exercise because just like a marketing message to our customer, it needs to resonate. If you're gonna roll out a new sales process within your organization, that needs to be messaged in a way that is very easy to understand. And so the real idea behind this is the messaging is we're changing the name of the steps. And so you could take the generalized bridge selling framework, the 6 steps we just talked about in the last video, and you could give that to your team and your reps. The issue is then when you're doing that, you're making them, just like the example we gave in previous videos, you're making them bend the generic or the general framework into their own custom one. And if you give 100 people the generic bridge selling framework, they may all have their own unique tweaks, and so now you're ending up with 100 different things. So the important thing is we need to change the title and change the name of each step for a few reasons. One, it makes it really easy to implement and unveil and teach, because when people see terms that relate to your product and your customer and your process, they instantly understand it. Paired with the concept of crossing a bridge, closing a sale or closing a stage is like crossing a bridge. It's almost impossible to get confused by that analogy. So if you can make a simple analogy put into custom language, your team is gonna understand it instantly. The other thing it can do is, depending on when you're going back and you're looking at calls, you're not gonna have to change likely everything about what you're doing. There's probably 2 or 3 or maybe 4 steps of the bridge that you wanna tweak, but there's going to be 1 or 2 or 3 or even 4 that you're actually doing well, depending on what your status is. I think the coolest part is anytime we develop a custom bridge selling framework, when we use the same terminology, the same titles in the steps of the bridge that connect with what the sales team is already doing, it doesn't feel like a heavy lift. It doesn't feel like a big change. It's just adding a new wrapping that's easier to understand, and going out of your way to translate the bridge into a custom version for your team will pay you dividends over and over and over again.
So let's dive into each step and let's talk about some nuances to each step for leaders to think about as they're thinking about how do we name this for our company, and even some of the kind of common questions or common mistakes that people make. So step 1 of the bridge is pinpoint the pain. And you differentiate between good marketing positioning and real, like true discovery on a call. So how should a leader explain the difference to reps who think the website or whatever your marketing material is, it's already doing the selling. If somebody is calling us, it means that they're gonna be a good fit because they know what we sell, they know the problem that we solve, and I don't need to cover true discovery and figuring out what their pain points are live on the call. What would you tell them as they're coaching their reps, and even as they're naming that step, how to think about that in their context?
When you think about naming it, so you can pinpoint the pain is relevant for everything, but if you hear like, oh, our customers don't really have pain points, or our website, people come to us, they're already ready to buy. And sometimes I'll get comments, I've gotten comments on LinkedIn about you don't need to do discovery. Like sales professionals will say discovery is not important if marketing is doing its job. And I just couldn't disagree more, because discovery is not about rehashing what your marketing is explaining. Your marketing is a one-to-many message that generally, even if you have a very targeted ICP, it's still speaking to the common denominator. The goal in sales discovery is to pick up where that left off. And then you're going into the unique pain points for that specific buyer, the thing that is driving them to make the decision. Customizing step 1, it's really just about building a deeper trust with your buyer. And so when you think about customizing it, you want to retitle it and rename it in a way that will resonate a little bit more with your buyer. And so I think of a couple of the examples we've done, like let's say in the mortgage industry, instead of pinpoint the pain, we've retitled that one, learn the buyer's backstory, right? So something that makes a little bit more sense where the sales rep is able to act on it easier. In the financial space, instead of pinpointing the pain, it might be spot the portfolio problem. And there's an example of titling it so that when your team sees it, they know what you're talking about. And you need to phrase it and title it in a way that someone would not object to it typically. Now, if you have a difficult team member or a bad apple, then that's a whole different story of someone who's objecting just to object. But you want to say, hey, if we did this, would it help us build better trust and understand our buyer? That's the way you want to be thinking of it, because now you don't have to get into a conversation about, well, let's be better at discovery. Instead, you're saying, hey, let's be better at learning our buyer's backstory. That clicks so much differently depending on how you title it and rename it within your company.
As we think about step 2, which is qualify the lead, this can actually get a little tricky sometimes around, you don't want to be too broad, but you also don't want to be too narrow in your definition of what is qualified for any, a particular company. What would you tell a leader when they're thinking through this on how can they define the right level of specificity under qualification without starving their pipeline?
Yeah, this is really important, and it's very, very nuanced and highly customizable, right? So this is one of the things where I want to be careful about going too deep and too specific, because what you decide for question 2, it's actually a major business strategy decision. And so if you get too narrow or too broad, you're gonna pay the price with your pipeline. Meaning you're either gonna let too many people through that should never be through, or you are gonna starve. You're gonna starve of potential revenue if you say no to a lot. So some things to keep in mind here are every company is gonna have a slightly unique, we talk about the bridge fit. So someone with a problem that you can solve, the authority to make the buying decision at full price, and a timeline that aligns with your capacity. Those are the big 3 that we look at. You can add a 4th on there, so sort of like a added differentiator. I know people who have done all kinds of things for that 4th layer, and that can help you get a little bit more clear. That can be an example of that. Might be someone I was talking to came from a couple large companies that went public at different points, and they were saying one of their differentiators for who was qualified was they would do all the basic BANT and qualification stuff and ICP, but then the added layer was, if we saw this person in public, did they give us a hug? So thinking about like really unique things like that. So you can go like the really cut and dry, like budget, title, industry, that's all important. But what can you think of to like sweeten it or enhance it that it really fits culturally with you? Like I think one thing in bridge selling is like we work with clients that they view us as peers, like colleagues, like we work together on things, and we don't. There's not a weird like authority balance thing, like you're a vendor or you're just a consultant, right? So that is something that you can add into your step 2, the bridge, to be a filter. But ultimately, you want to go as narrow as you can go. And so if you look at your pipeline and you look at your past deals and you realize, hey, 90% of our customer service issues were from customers with this. You might want to use that to help decide your bridge fit and define how you're titling that and what you're going to call step 2 of the bridge. So widen it as wide as you can go. Like I would say timeline and buying time, like buying decision timeline and some of those things you can get wide on. What you don't want to get wide on is decision maker, budget, ability to pay full price. Some of those things will wreak havoc because you'll end up discounting to close a deal or scope creep to make it work for someone. And if you're having to change that qualification metric in a way that it now impacts what you're actually offering in a negative way, that's a red flag too. So those are a few things that I think about it. And you can always narrow your bridge fit and your step 2 in the bridge over time.
In step 3, so solution and success, you emphasize simplifying demos and presentations. And we often see where there's lots of info dumping when a sales rep starts talking about their product or service. So what are some practical ways a leader can help reps decide what do you actually lead with and talk about at that part of the conversation? And then what do you save for later so you don't overwhelm buyers?
Yeah, this is a fine skill, and this really is a control exercise, and it's a focus exercise. And so what I like to coach on or say on is we like the pick 3 rule. So do you have 10 features and benefits in your product? Well, when you're pitching or you're going over your solution, you're only going to talk about the 3 that connect to the pain points your buyer has. So if your buyer has if you can't uncover those pain points, you're set up in a position where you're just going to be info dumping and throwing spaghetti at the wall and hoping it sticks. So the pick 3 is really helpful. Some analogies, the way we've gone about this in real life application is a software. You've got 10 things or a product with 10 things that is amazing, or maybe could be 100 things, right? Depending on what you're selling. Focus on pain points, and you are only going to talk about the 3 that connect to a pain point. Another was a world famous brick and mortar fitness brand. They used to do tours for their buyer was a busy mom. A family was their customer, and their buyer was the busy mom. And typically the mom was coming in for a tour at the end of the school day with 2 or 3 hungry kids that it's like, hey, I don't have time for a lot. And so an example of how it could be tweaked in that situation was it was like an hour-long tour. And if you've ever been sold on a gym membership, this is every time it happens. This happened to me a few months ago, is you walk in and you're like cringing because you're already ready to buy, but you end up getting a full tour. So an example here is instead of a full tour of every single thing at this location, we're just gonna do a light discovery on what brought that buyer in. And now we're gonna customize a quick 15, 10-minute tour around just the 3 amenities that are gonna solve a problem for the buyer. Save the rest for Q&A. So you save the rest for step 4, the bridge. Cater step 3 to what are the main things that solve a pain point, and then you can always go deeper, and you can do a little bit of info dumping, quote unquote, in step 4, but you don't want to make that your pitch. You want to make that just additional information.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Because those things won't move the needle, is the only thing that will move the needle on the decision is solving some sort of pain point, and that's why that's so important.
Yeah. So when you get into step 4, which is Q&A, and where you can add some of those things in, you talk about creating an essential responses document.
Yeah.
Describe what should be included in this doc and how leaders can build this, 1, so it's relevant, but 2, so it doesn't turn into a script for their reps, but it turns into a helpful tool.
This is a really important tool because when you think of the visual of the bridge and then the magic pivots that go kind of between each step of the bridge, that helps you go back and forth. Where reps can run into trouble is in Q&A, and you get asked a specific question. It could be about a technical feature of your product. It could be about a difference in comparison with a competitor. It could be about your process. I think those are the big 3 categories where your reps need to know what to say, but you're not guiding the conversation forward or backward then. What you're doing is giving a confident answer that helps your buyer make a confident decision. And so in step 4, the essential responses document it's sort of a living, breathing document, but how I would start this if I'm a sales leader watching this right now, or what we would do in any sort of workshop with a client is we're gonna sit down and we're gonna say, all right, sales team, fill in the blank. I hate when a buyer asks me this. And you're gonna get a list of probably 10 different things that maybe you never thought of. And it could be everything we just mentioned: price point, competitor stuff, technical features. Those are the things that cause a rep to advance a conversation faster than it should because they don't wanna approach those tough questions. And then you have a buyer on the other side who doesn't get a clear answer to their hidden questions. So the essential responses document, it's really just when you go back and listen and you do your initial bridge score assessment, that's where you're gonna find, hey, sales rep A was so good at answering a question about this competitor, and they use that response every single time. What the essential responses document does is it gives you a home base where now all of your reps can become as good as your best rep. Yeah. Or if you have one rep good in one area, another rep good in another area, you're combining all the most effective responses. And this can be a fun exercise between your team where you're just combining, you're sourcing all the knowledge. And I would say it's typically 10 to 15 questions, maybe 20 things that you need to be prepared to answer confidently.
Yeah. What strikes me about this is that anytime a sales rep, if they're going to dodge a question, the one they don't want to answer, that is going to erode trust with the buyer. And we are in an age of trust, especially when you can get all the information you can get on the internet about a company, about a product. It's that conversation. If they're at the point where they're on the phone with you, you need to be willing to transparently and proactively even address those conversations or those questions. And that's where these essential responses really arm your sales reps to do that with confidence, to not flinch when the question gets asked. And all of those things go a long way to building trust with the buyer.
That's it. And I think a closing point on this is, while we don't want it to be a script, when you hire someone new, you really want to beat that information into the brain, because you want it to flow naturally when you get asked. And the only way to do that is by truly internalizing it, by truly knowing it, not rehearsing a script and regurgitating it, but knowing the answer and like knowing it in your heart. And that's where practice can come into play. It may be effective to make the essential responses and then do a bit of a role play. And rather than changing the way you're saying it, you can change the how you're delivering it. And it's not as much a script that you need to memorize and regurgitate as much as it is, okay, how can you say that with a little bit more conviction? And how can you say that so that it flows a little bit better? That's kind of the heart and soul of the whole step 4 of the bridge.
Yeah, 100%. So step 5 of the bridge, which is 3 next steps, it depends heavily on aligning with the buyer's timeline. Now, we've seen this often when we've listened to calls, how reps will revert to, like, I'll follow up with you next week, or I'll follow up with you in 2 weeks, very generic. How would you coach them to shift that habit into something that's more effective for step 5?
Yeah, and when you think of making it more effective so it changes habits, the first thing I would look, if I'm a leader, is how can we name and title that step in a way that it resonates the most? So if you are in software and you do onboarding, you might want to title it something related to onboarding so they know they're building an onboarding plan. They're not just doing 3 next steps. If you're in mortgage, it might be an application. If you're in whatever it is, you might want to title it in a way that clicks. That's the first step. And then after that, the coaching and the execution really comes down to, how good is your team at uncovering timeline? How good are they at knowing when the buyer wants to make a decision or when they want to move forward? So how good are they at uncovering that early and organically? That way, when it comes time to execute step 5, it's there. It's already, you're only going back into things you've learned previously in conversation. You're not having at the last minute to be like, hey, so when do you want to move forward on this? I think every buyer knows when you get to that point, the rep is sort of looking for a lever to pull. And if you can do it organically, that's the most important thing. But if you can understand in the first 5-10 minutes of a conversation what that timeline is, by the time you get to step 5 of the bridge, you're just going back to something that was already discussed and saying, okay, based on this, we're going to reverse it back. So something to think through is, if your reps are not outlining 3 next steps in parallel with the buyer's timeline, let's say that buyer is talking to other companies, and maybe that buyer's timeline is actually immediately they're ready to go now. But your rep is assuming they're not ready to go now. So your rep says, hey, I'll follow up with you in 2 weeks. I'm gonna send you this information packet. I'm gonna follow up with you in 2 weeks. Well, then the buyer goes and talks to another competitor who says, well, it sounds like your timeline is now you're ready to go. I can send you a proposal now, and we can do an onboarding call tomorrow if this sounds like the right fit. The difference in momentum and ease for the buyer is outstanding. And so we want to get to that place where it feels super organic and it's cohesive with the buyer's timeline.
Yeah, that makes sense. So step 6, close or schedule. And you share examples where small tweaks, like renaming what that's next call, if that's the next step is, renaming that can make a difference. What should leaders look for when deciding how to position that final step, whether it's the close or whether it is scheduling, depending on what that close for that particular call is? How should they be thinking about that as it relates to what they're selling and their process?
That's right. So this is really important. You want to optimize it, and you want to err on the side of completing a transaction with that step and whether the transaction is you're scheduling a conversation with another rep for a future stage, we consider that like that's an action. It's not a monetary transaction, but you are transacting from one step to the next. Or monetarily, when is revenue coming in the door? Does that require sign up for a software? Does that require an application for a project? Does that require something else similar to that? You want to optimize step 6 for that. So it's a matter of you want to title it in a way where your reps, when you use the generic framework, your rep is going to be thinking, okay, I either want to close or schedule, and that's great. But oftentimes we'll take the easier route, which is always going to be to schedule, or the route of no rejection is usually just let's just schedule and keep this thing alive. Where if you can title it something like complete sign up or schedule follow up, and you know the rep knows complete sign up is a green and schedule follow-up is a yellow, there's a different mindset approach there. So be thinking, and how can we do that? Does that mean we need to lengthen our calls by 10 minutes so that we can actually complete a sign-up now? Little things like that is where I'd be investigating and interrogating for optimizing on step 6.
Yeah. So for companies with a multi-stage or multi-rep sales journey, and we've alluded to this a couple of times in these conversations, but we haven't addressed it head on. How do they determine how many bridges they need?
Some rules to think through here is normally each person should have their own bridge. So if you have one person doing full cycle, you want to set that bridge up so that it's one bridge, they only have to think about one bridge. If it's an SDR handing off to an AE, that you need an SDR bridge, let's say that's a discovery call bridge, an AE is gonna execute a demo, then you're gonna have the demo bridge. And we talk about that in the book. So the way I would go about this is it the same sales rep all the way through? You may want one bridge. If there's a handoff to another rep, you may want two. You could have 2 different sales stages working on the same bridge, but that can get confusing too when you have another sales rep coming in and they haven't gone through certain steps in the bridge. It can just create a rehash and a repeat for the buyer, and that's really what you want to avoid. If you go with 2 bridges, you've got to make sure that second bridge is deeper, it's better, it's more personalized, you're going deeper on product or on pain points, or you are going to another level where the buyer doesn't feel like it's redundant and it's repeated. Because I'm even thinking, I'm thinking back to a sales process the 2 of us were on not too long ago as the buyer. Yep. And the first conversation with one rep was a literal repeat of the intake form that we just took, that we just done to sign up for the call. Yep. And then the second call was basically 50% the same information from the first call. And so sometimes you might think you need 2 bridges, but you really just need to delete an entire stage. Yeah. And those are the things you'll discover when you start to think through this.
Yeah. I remember that call. It was painful.
It wasn't fun. Yeah, we made it though.
Yeah, we made it. Yeah, okay, so that's perfect. Chapter 4, at this point, our listeners, they should have clarity on what it looks like for them to really dive into the process of customizing the bridge steps for their company, knowing how to define scoring criteria for their company. And so from here, we're gonna take a turn as we head into chapter 5, and now we get to talk about, okay, how do we roll this out within our team?
Erin, can I make one more point of encouragement for the reader before we go on? I would just say, progress, some of the cliches here, progress is more important than perfection. Yep. If you think you have a bridge 80% dialed out, that's okay, go for it. I would try not to start with the general bridge if you have a larger team you're rolling it out to. I would start with some form of custom bridge so we can all start with a common language that's unique to our company. But don't be afraid to enhance your bridge in a month or in 2 months. You're gonna get more clear. You might find a better title that like really clicks with your team. So don't let perfection stop you from rolling out something that's really good already. So I would just encourage the reader in that. At this point in the book, you might be thinking, I don't know if I have it right. Yeah. Are you pretty far along? Go for it. You're doing great.
Yeah, I love that. All right, let's dive into chapter 5.
See you there. All right.